Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Students Talk Back lunchtime discussion series. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Kirsten Olson. I'm the interim director of the Unruh Institute of Politics here at USC. And I'll spend a few moments introducing our panel, and then we will get started with questions. To my immediate right is Dr. Tom Williams. We are going to refer to him as Dr. Tom. He is currently a Water Club committee member at the Sierra Club. He's also a specialist in natural resources, water, air, oil, gas, and wetlands, and infrastructure, which includes water supply, groundwater, sewerage, drainage, and all rail and railroads. He formerly spent 10 years with the Dubai government working on infrastructure projects, and he received his PhD from Cal Berkeley in paleontology, geology, and zoology with a focus in climatology. So if you would hold your applause, please, while I introduce our distinguished panel.
Global warming.
To his right, please say hello to Charles Epting, who is a member of the USC College Republicans, also just happens to be a geology major here at USC, perfect for this discussion. To his right is Jared Dagonia. Jared is currently the legislative deputy for the Los Angeles County Supervisor Michael Antonovich's office. Supervisor Antonovich represents the 5th District, which includes the San Gabriel, Pomona, San Fernando, Santa Clarita, and Antelope Valleys. And then, of course, all the way at the end, we have Nathaniel Haas, who is an opinion columnist for the USC Daily Trojan and USC Neon Tommy. He's also here representing College Democrats. And then to my left, of course, as always, we're joined in these events by the USC Daily Trojan, our campus newspaper. Sarah Clayton is my co-moderator this afternoon, representing the Daily Trojan. So everyone, please welcome our panelists. So to get started and just to have a sort of primer for our audience about the way California uses water, we're going to look to you, Dr. Tom, just to give us a brief primer about how Northern California, the Central Valley, and Southern California share water resources.
Good afternoon. Water. It's a very important product, and it's considered as a product in the state of California. The Sacramento Valley, Northern California, has water, still has water. And climatologically, we'll probably continue having water even with some global warming. The Central Valley, which includes the Sacramento Valley at the north and the San Joaquin Valley at the south, differ markedly. The San Joaquin Valley, about half or a third of it was virtually a desert until the California State Water Project came in the 60s. It turned deserts into productive agricultural land with huge consumptions of water. Why? Because it made money for a lot of people in Kern and Kings County, selling desert land for agricultural land. Incremental tax revenue, Kern County won a great deal of new money. How did they get it passed? They got it passed by having the conveyance go all the way to San Diego and try to help Southern California. So you should always look at water issues in 3 parts. Northern California, or the Sacramento Valley, Central California, the San Joaquin Valley, and then Southern California. So we're kind of at the end of the stick. But they need us to pay for any water bond and the water rates.
As we all know, in January of this year, the Governor Brown, declared a water emergency here in the state of an official drought here in the state of California. And then a couple weeks ago, he announced a plan to abate some of the costs that are going to be associated with this drought. His plan was to propose $687 million in aid to the state of California to various sectors of our economy. So Sarah's going to ask the first question directly about that program.
So So Charles, as a member of the member of the USC College Republicans, I wanted to ask, $687 million is a lot for this type of an aid plan. So I was wondering, do you think this is too much or too little for this aid plan, and do you think the funding covers everything?
Thank you very much for having me today. First and foremost, I'd like to start with an anecdote. I'm a history minor as well, so sort of mix my disciplines here. In 1887, the state of Texas was having a very severe drought. A lot of farmers were losing their jobs, and Congress passed a bill that would have appropriated $10,000 to fund new seeds for the farmers in Texas. And President Grover Cleveland vetoed the bill that would have given the farmers the money because he didn't think it was the responsibility of the government to fund such programs. The farmers in Texas started worrying that they wouldn't have any money to pay for new seeds. Charities across the nation raised $100,000 to help negate the drought in Texas. So private charities were able to raise 10 times the amount of money that the government would have offered them. So I think right there that proves that there has not always been a precedent for the government spending its way out of a crisis such as the drought we're in. The other thing, this drought is nothing new. This is not a particularly unique drought. There have been droughts regularly over the past couple of centuries. Tree rings show that in 1850, there was a drought much worse than the drought we're currently in right now. So to answer your question directly, I don't think that spending over $600 million is the right way to do this. If you're going to spend that much money on a program such as this, I think you need to look at new water storage programs, which the Governor Brown's bill does not include at all. All of his money goes towards alleviating the monetary hit on farmers. So I don't think that amount of money is proper, and I don't think the things that money is going towards directly is proper either. So I disagree with Governor Brown's $687 million proposal.
Nathaniel, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, sure. I think that it's interesting to look at the $687 million as new spending necessarily because over $550 million of that money has already been bonded off. So what the governor's bill does is just allocates that. I think that it's also interesting in that we've had droughts before, but since we started keeping records in the 1850s or 60s, this is calculatively the worst drought that we've had on record. And I think that where I'm most in agreement with Charles is that this cannot be a short-term Band-Aid solution. I think that the crisis offers us a unique opportunity to invest in long-term water storage issues and fix the structural problem that will prevent us from ever efficiently allocating water in the state. Again, the last time we had a drought of this proportion was when Governor Brown's father was the governor in the late 50s and the early 60s, and that was really the last time that there was a major overhaul of the structure and how we allocate and store water. And if ever, I mean, we'll talk about the political feasibility of some of these efforts, but I think if ever a time to spend government money on long-term storage issues, now is that time, because it's the only time when you can overcome the significant political roadblocks to something this massive, and pointing at the worst drought in 160 years is a really, really powerful incentive to do that. So.
One thing I'd like to correct you on, we've only been keeping records for the past century, not since the 1850s or 60s. Any data before that is based on tree ring records. Also, according to some reports, 1924 was a worse drought season than the one we're currently experiencing. So.
Dr. Tom, I'd like to ask you a pointed question about some of the specifics of Governor Brown's plan. As we mentioned, the proposal calls for a certain amount to be issued from currently allocated bond funds. And there's some controversy about the way in which some of the dollars will be spent. The legislation does not include funding to build new water storage facilities, new reservoirs. There are some on both sides of the aisle that say that's a smart idea and some that say that's a foolish idea. Is building more reservoirs a solution to this problem?
We like to talk about it, especially from DWP, as one water. First off, Sierra Club and others have always proposed conserve. Right now, the city of Los Angeles uses approximately the same amount of water as it did 20 years ago with the population increase, because they reduced through conservation. We're reusing water. We're getting ready to recycle very advanced wastewater for potable use via groundwater. We have the ability to probably reduce the total amount of water used by DWP by about 25%. The issue now becomes, are we going to get 25% more people? Because we have the infrastructure right now for approximately enough water to, if we conserved, to supply 25% more people. That is another million people in the city of Los Angeles. So we're in difficulties. The best and cheapest storage is underground. However, with the State Water Project and the Owens Valley and various other projects that have gone on in the city of Los Angeles and the LA Basin, we gave up on the groundwater. We had pipes, so we could just turn the spigot rather than having to pump it out of the ground. We didn't have to worry about the groundwater, so we didn't worry about the groundwater. Now people are starting to worry about the groundwater because it's a lot cheaper than surface storage.
It's interesting that he brings up groundwater and the lack of groundwater, or the lack of groundwater for preparation in Southern California, the LA Basin. Very interestingly enough, in the last few years, the County of Los Angeles itself has started to implement its flood control practices to try and focus not just on protection of property and lives, but how do we store that flood water to recharge LA's aquifers. And right now, as we speak, there's several dam projects that the county is undertaking up in the foothill areas, up in the Sylmar, Sunland, Tahunga area and out towards Pasadena, in which some of the dams there have been overrun by sediment. So they're trying to get the sediment removed from those dams. But along with the removal of that sediment, what we're trying to do is also create, for lack of a better word, ponds in the middle of Los Angeles, in the middle of the San Fernando Valley, that are going to act as aquifer rechargers. And so it is an attempt by the county to try and get back into underground storage and replenish those aquifers that were so prevalent in the LA Basin. In addition, some of our outlying water areas, or outlying water districts, particularly in the Santa Clarita Valley north of Los Angeles, what's taking place now is something called water banking. And what water districts are doing is they are taking advantage of aquifers in other regions. For instance, the Castaic Lake Water Agency, which provides water to the Santa Clarita Valley, uses aquifers in Kern County to store water. Therefore, in dry years, they are going to try and bank on that water that they've stored in Kern County and use that as credit to come back towards the Santa Clarita Valley in dry years. So this concept of groundwater is definitely not new, but it's definitely something that's trying to be taken advantage of by local governments.
So currently, as you touched on groundwater, groundwater is entirely unregulated here in California as it stands now. Is there something that the government should do to intervene to, I mean, we can always have a philosophical argument about regulation versus non-regulation, but is there something in an emergency like this that the local government can do to intervene beyond just cautioning people to conserve?
Now, that's an interesting question, and the short answer is not quickly and not without getting involved in the courts. Water is the blood of California. History has showed us that it is the most regulated, judicious, litigated issue that we've had in our state's history, right next to railroads. The issue of underground water storage, there's upwards of 22 water retailers alone in Los Angeles, in the Metropolitan Water Service area of Los Angeles County. Each one of those water districts has some sort of, they believe, has a say in how underground water, what they have in underground storage. So they all have competing interests and have a competing stake. Is there an overarching, should the state come in and regulate it? Do the feds come in and regulate it? They could try. Whether or not that could be done politically, I doubt, and whether or not it can be done legally, it won't happen quickly. I will say this, water politics in California is very unique in one fashion, and that is the majority of fights in California fall on partisan lines, Republican versus Democrat. Water does not. Water is geographic. And it's more interest-based and geographic-based than it is partisan-based. You have Central Valley farmers versus Southern California developers and builders versus Northern California environmental advocates versus Bay Area. Actually, Bay Area and right now the Bay Area and the Los Angeles area have a lot in common in that both are going through the same water shortages. And together, right now, they form a formidable political bloc. in terms of what's going to happen with water storage. But long-term picture and history of water in California doesn't fall on partisan sides. It falls on geographic and special interest sides.
Anyone have anything else to say on that subject?
Yeah, I guess I just add that when I wrote a column on this a couple of weeks ago, the poll numbers were actually sort of shocking. I mean, we talk about the feasibility of solving the drought by encouraging people to conserve, and I think I'm in general in agreement that calling people to conserve 20% of water when your state drought awareness website has a big picture of a broom that says sweep your driveway, don't spray your driveway, I think is just sort of silly in some respects. But what's not silly is that people don't realize how much this issue affects them. 7% of California respondents to a poll said that the drought was the #1 issue facing the state. 7%. And the reason that many of them cited for why they thought that, or why such a low percentage of them thought that way was because they'd never experienced something like this before. This was something new. It was not something that they'd had to deal with. And so I think we'll talk about the political solutions in a little bit, but to build support for those political solutions, more than 7% of people in California have to care about this issue and think that it's a bigger issue. And right now, for this year, in terms of where water prices are going to go or are projected to go, if they can't solve this in the long term, we have to get more people to realize how this affects them.
DWP about 3 years ago had a problem of a drought. They asked people to conserve water. They did, 27% off of the previous year. The unfortunate part for DWP was that their revenues are generated based upon water use. It's a product. And all your standard economic commodity products analysis are appropriate. If they reduce the amount of water going through the pipes, they reduce their revenue, and thereby they cannot contribute to the city of Los Angeles. The other side of it is that they instituted a 2-tier rate, kind of the first time. That is, those that use more than a certain amount had to pay a higher fee. We were trying to get them to actually implement a full 4-tiered rate because as a commodity, you can control the consumption by how much you charge for it. Right now, DWP has a rate that I believe is about 1/2 of what they should be paying or charging to us, you, me. So there's one way of promoting conservation in an easy manner, but you then have to get elected at the next mayoral race. Thank you.
And on this topic of conservation, Dr. Tom, I wanted to ask you, what do you think are some more innovative and environmentally sound ways of going about solving this drought?
Solving the drought, we can't. It's coming. It's here. It will be here for a very long time. When I first came to California, LA had an average rainfall of 15 inches. About 10 years ago, they revised it to 13 inches. It's going down. And from my experience with global climate change or global warming, forget about getting rain from the north. Start thinking about, hey, June, July rains, yeah, but they'll be very small. And those are not effective. And in fact, we coined a term, snow drought, because all of us depend in August, September, October on the northern Sierra snow. If we don't have it, where do we get the water? We can't store that amount of water. Arnold Schwarzenegger thought we could. That's why he had the 2010 water plan to store water, because it's very expensive to store water. It's a lot cheaper for snow. So I foresee this is going to become a recurring and perhaps, let's go down to 10 inches rainfall. We haven't even gotten that this year. But 10 inches of rainfall, or if the Sierra got 39 inches of rainfall a year, we couldn't afford it. Snowpack is the real issue. And the Southern Sierra, Owens Valley for DWP has lost it. So There's a lot of things, but it all comes back as to how much money do you want to pay? You have bottled water. How much per gallon do you pay for bottled water? It's very expensive. Would you be willing to pay that same price for showers?
One point I'd like to raise, because Dr. Tom brought it up on the global warming issue. I just thought it was interesting that last week the New York Times ran an article admitting that the California drought probably wasn't a result of global warming, and that a majority of models predicted a wetter climate in California. So when the New York Times is against you, then you know that that says something about the issue. That this probably doesn't have as much to do with global warming as it does a cyclical drought that California's experienced for centuries and millennia. So.
Before we transition into the politics of the conversation, I do want to ask one more question of you, Mr. Degonia. There was, again, he's from County Supervisor Antonivich's office, and you know, a lot of us here at USC teach our students, or like to teach our students, about how politics, you know, really should be returned to the local level, because that's where a lot of influence can be made. And you hear that often in politicians' speeches at the federal level. Let's return power and influence to the local level. So there was a program back in 2009 that the county supervisor signed up for that installed water-saving devices in the county, and at least 250 customers took advantage of it, and in that particular time frame alone, they reduced water usage by 1.3 million gallons. So is that an example of, you know, a way on the ground, so to speak, no pun intended, we can solve these problems?
It is one small example, but it really does take a collaboration of federal, state, and local governments to, as best they can, collaborate together on future strategies. That program in 2009, is anybody here from the Santa Clarita Valley? No. The Santa Clarita Valley is a fairly arid valley just north of Los Angeles, and that program was specifically for the Santa Clarita area because of environmental and water issues that they had there. Now, a lot of those issues were regulatory driven, not necessarily because of a lack of water or because of poor water quality. It was that the federal government directed that they had poor water quality. And in return, what we did at the local level was institute this grant program to try and address water quality and water supply issues to try and comply with the federal mandates. Now, our fight at the local level was to try and stress to the U.S. EPA and to Congress that these federal mandates were too stringent, that what they were demanding was unreasonable. That being said, we implemented the local grant program to try and come into compliance with what, or at least strive to come into compliance with what the feds were directing. While it was a successful local program, we did not, in the long term, right now, currently, are not in compliance with the federal EPA guidelines and regulations, and we are still fighting that fight. And the Santa Clarita Valley and the water users there are facing significant fines at the federal and local level to try and comply with those federal guidelines. So yeah, it was a successful program, but we have a long way to go, and it's going to take collaboration between locals and feds to really work on this.
So just as a reminder, at the midpoint of the hour is when we turn the conversation over to you and encourage you all to ask questions of our panel. That will happen in a few moments, so please start thinking of your questions that you would like to be addressed by any one of our panelists. So turning our conversation to the politics of the issue, of course, that's always a part of the conversation, right? House Republicans recently on this topic have labeled the drought man-made, said that it was entirely a man-made issue. And you know, when other politicians have been asked to talk about the source of California's drought at this time, they have vacillated on the issue. Some have said it is, some have said that it's not. When Governor Brown was asked to comment recently, he said that he thought that sector of the conversation was just divisive. It didn't need to be had. We just need to focus on results and getting water to people. How much of the politics is going well, and how much of it is going against the grain? How much of it is not really solving the problem?
I'll take a stab at that. At the federal level, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening in general at the federal level, but especially on water. On the House side, House Republicans have introduced a bill sponsored by Central Valley. As you probably all of you know, the demographics of California, the more inland you go, the more red it gets. So Central Valley Republicans have introduced a drought relief bill that overwhelmingly passed the House, but stalled in the Senate. Likewise, Senator Boxer and Senator Feinstein, along with a senator from Oregon, I can't remember his name right now, introduced another piece of legislation, and that passed the Senate, but it's going to get blocked in the House. And they were two very, very different bills. The House Republican bill called for regulatory relief, which from my perspective is desperately needed, although is not the full picture. And then the Senate bill focused mostly on immediate fiscal relief and compensation for lost farmland and for lost jobs. Both really, while I personally believe the House bill did more to try and get at the long-term solutions, both failed in that attempt. At the state level, one of the issues I have with with Governor Brown's proposal is not the proposal itself necessarily, because he does try and address both short-term and long-term issues in regards to it. It's the fact of the use of the funds itself. It was alluded to earlier that $500 million of that was from previous bond measures. Why was that money not spent when the bonds were adopted? How could there possibly be $500 million that could have been used in preparation for this drought that would have gone a long way? Why are we just now getting to use it, and we have to use it in a crisis situation? I think that at the state level is where we have to kind of focus. There's money there. It's been allocated. Why wasn't it spent?
So Charles and Nathaniel, are politicians looking at the drought as a political issue, or are they really looking at it as an environmental and economic issue? What are really?
I was on the phone with Congressman Dana Rohrabacher. He represents Orange County earlier this week, and I was asking him about the drought. I said, Mr. Rohrabacher, if you were in charge, what would you do right this second to alleviate the problem? He gave me a three-point plan. His first point was that we need to turn the pumps back on in the Sacramento River Delta. He said that should be everybody's first priority right now. Each year, we're letting 800,000 acre-feet of water flow back into the Pacific Ocean. If you don't know what an acre-foot is, it's literally an acre of land covered in a foot of water. So when you think about 800,000 acre-feet of water flowing into the ocean to protect an endangered fish that has no economic or environmental impact, it's kind of absurd. He said, first things first, we need to focus on getting the pumps back on. His second plan was we need to invest more in desal plants across the state. There have been some big technological breakthroughs lately. Companies like Lockheed Martin have proposed more economically viable means of desalination, and he thinks we need to invest in the energy that goes along with those. And his third point is he said we need to ban drinking water for elected officials in California, which he said right there that would take care of most of the issue.
Am I allowed to drink water?
But I thought his first 2 points were fantastic. That the third one too. He's not looking at this in terms of the government needs to spend its way out of the problem that we need to. If we turn the pumps back on, a lot of the people in the Central Valley, instead of having to bail them out, they'd have the water again. In certain communities, there's 40% unemployment because of the drought. And as he explained to me, these are people who need our help the most. A lot of them are immigrants. A lot of them are living just above the poverty line already, and by cutting off their water, which the state government has done, we're throwing them into abject poverty. We're creating a need for them to become reliant on the government. He said that a lot of the environmental movement isn't as much pro-environment as it is anti-people. They're trying to break down every improvement we've made since the Industrial Revolution. So that's what one House of Representatives member advised me before speaking on this panel. Those are his solutions. And
I want to highlight something that he just said, and just kind of backtracking a little bit to kind of illustrate the crisis that this is facing. And this really is a crisis. I truly believe that. We have towns in central and northern California that have been evacuated, that are relative ghost towns. And they're not ghost towns because of economics. They're ghost towns because they've ran out of water. Their reservoirs have ran out of water. Could you imagine Los Angeles, whether it be downtown LA, USC, or the San Fernando Valley, could you imagine being evacuated because we don't have any water here? Well, they are facing that in some smaller communities in Northern California.
I guess I'd add to that. I think that it's important to look at it as both a short-term and a long-term issue. You know, you obviously can't just say the solution to the drought is to build more pipes because there are people that are going without water and people that desperately need to be helped. I was talking to Maribel Batcher, who's the head of the Government Operations Office for Governor Brown. She's in his cabinet. She said the thing that needs to happen is both a combination of a short and the long term. So in terms of the politics of this issue, in November, you all, if you're registered, are going to vote on a water bond, which is projected to be in, they're trying to bring it down to about $6 billion, but, what the water bond that was originally proposed and they've struggled to get on the ballot was $11 billion. Where the politics comes into this matter is that most of that money is earmarked as pork. It's earmarked to special interests. It's earmarked to allocation projects that are only put on the ballot because their representatives suggested it. And I'll return to what I said about the politics of a crisis, because I think that what this requires is for both sides, the environmental advocates that oppose the proposal to build the 2 new pipelines to bring water from the north to the Central Valley, and the people on the other side of that issue that think that that's the only solution to the long term, both have to realize that they have to give something up, and that there are going to be implications no matter what people vote on. And that's what compromise is about. It's about productive disagreement, where both people say, we're willing to live with these consequences because consequences are going to happen no matter what we vote on, but we have to do something. And so once you understand that, the short-term issue is about turning the pumps on, you have to just turn to encouraging compromise and encouraging people to get past their differences. Otherwise, we'll never solve the issue in the long term.
Great. So now we'll be taking questions from the audience. Just want to remind you that if you are asking a question, we want you to say your name and your major.
Yeah, I'll explain the background in a second. Of course. Right. 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 Of course.
So
No.
Charles, could you repeat the question for everyone once again?
Sure. Briefly, he asked first about the rhetoric about the Delta Smelt, which has sort of become the figurehead for pumping, and then followed up with, is the Republican plan just to pump sort of recklessly and to try and solve the problem right now immediately, or are there long-term factors kept in mind as well? Is that fair? Okay. A little bit about
Fish versus farms.
That's what the debate's become. A little bit of background about the Delta Smelt. It's a fish that's about that big that lives in the Sacramento River Delta. Like I said, it serves no economic impact. It's too small to even be used as a bait fish by fishermen.
It's too small to fry.
Exactly. It's this little tiny fish that is federally listed on the Endangered Species Act. The lawmakers in California sought an exemption from this fish so that they could turn the pumps back on. They tried to get the Endangered Species Act to exclude this one fish, and a federal court struck down that proposal for that compromise and said that we need to protect this little tiny fish. Now there's also the debate about salmon, whether salmon populations will be able to breed. So it's not just the Delta Smelt. Delta Smelt, I think because it has sort of a catchy name, it's become a figurehead for the issue. But the thing that everybody has to realize about the drought is this is not a lasting issue. In a couple of years ago, we had rainfall. In a couple of years, we'll have rainfall again. There's been a lot of talk that this year is shaping up. It's looking good to be an El Nino year, which will bring a lot of rainfall to the west coast of the United States. So the thing about turning the pumps on is this would not exhaust them forever. In a wet year, we can have the pumps on and there'll be minimal environmental impact because there'll be enough water replenishing it. What we need to do now, though, is because we finally faced a situation such as this, turning the pumps on until nature alleviates us from the drought is what's necessary. This is not that we'd be pumping the Sacramento River Delta until it goes dry. Nathaniel's been talking about the long-term and short-term. This is a short-term solution. That the drought's not going to last forever. There's going to come a time when California has an excess of rain. So Mr. Rohrabacher and Republicans in Congress, their solution is that, as Dr. Tom said, right now it's the issue of fish versus farms. And as Mr. Rohrabacher explained to me, there is no animal's life that's more important than a human's life. And we have thousands of Americans who are losing their jobs, who are being sent into poverty by decisions the government made at the expense of fish literally this big. So I don't think that there would be any long-term repercussions from turning the pumps on, at least to get us through the next wet period. And I think that what we need to be focused on is taking care of the American people and not taking care of a fish that may have outlived its welcome evolutionarily. There is no purpose for this fish. So
Yeah,
species go extinct from time to time. Maybe it's the Delta Smelt's time. Maybe we need to protect our human beings instead of the fish.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if we get so caught up in debates about the fish and they preclude a focus on the short term, imagine the environmental debates that are going to occur over Governor Brown's proposal to build 2 pipelines that are the size of the 10 freeway from the north to the Central Valley to pump water. I mean, they're already gearing up for massive, massive debates, and I think that it's indicative of the conflict of interest between the environmental groups and the people that see the need for a long-term solution. I think even if the drought is a short-term solution, or a short-term problem rather, even if it will rain in another couple of years, I've said this again and I'll say it again, it's the politics of a crisis that make investment in the long-term solution possible. And it will rain in 2 years, and when it rains this weekend, I guarantee you for the next 2 weeks you won't read a single headline about the drought, which is frightening, but is emblematic of the need for a long-term solution now. Even if we don't experience another drought, I think they have to get past these environmental concerns and realize that species will go extinct in the short term, but long-term solutions are really important, yeah.
Charles, thanks for coining my favorite new expression, evolutionarily outlived one's welcome. We're going to use that. Do we have any other questions? Again, please tell us your name and your major if you are a USC student. Not one question, huh? Okay. Yes, please.
Most of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Yemen, Oman, UAE, Bahrain, all depend upon desalination. If you have enough fuel for it, it works. Right now in the state of California, do you really want to use seawater for desalination? I know desalination, all of the, quotes, newer parts. Desalination actually in Southern California started back in the 60s when Orange County didn't have any choices. They treated the sewage very well, and they desaled it and injected it into the ground as a groundwater barrier for salt water. It's been done. It's very expensive. It's not as expensive as one of these bottles of water. So it can be done. Technical? Yeah. They're proposing it, and they're doing a little bit of it up in the San Fernando Valley. They proposed it for Santa Clarita. It's a fail-safe issue. If you want to pay for it, don't expect your rates to remain low. So as long as you're willing to pay for it. We have found, DWP has found, that the cheapest water supply is conservation. So might say that you take the low-hanging fruit. Hey, reduce the use. Replace the use something else that doesn't require the water. Just as an example, every year, DWP brings in 600,000 acre feet No, sorry. Yeah, 600,000 acre feet, about 650. All that goes to sea through sewage treatment is only 400,000. Green grass. How many lawns do you want? How many trees do you want? Trees that require huge amounts of water. You can conserve. We're down at my house to 50 gallons per person per day, and we're still trying to figure out where the 50 gallons go. So it can be done. Desal is very, very expensive. Not as expensive as buying bottled water, though. So you can do it, but you can do it so many other different ways. And you might say, for the smelt, hey, why do we have to kill every other species on the planet in order for us to be okay? If you really want to see what happens, go to Owens Valley, where DWP basically bought the farms. And now it's a depressed area. The state of California allowed the farmers in Kern, Kings, Fresno, and such to plant perennial crops. The original state water project was for annual crops. But those don't make as much money. They don't require as many employees. And, so it can be done. Right now, they're ripping out orchards, ripping out vineyards. Why? Because they don't have the water. Do I expect that in a couple of years we'll get more rainfall? We might get more rainfall. It might be in June or July or August. And effective rainfall, that is, yes, as global warming progresses, the tropical rains coming from the south, not from the north, will come into Southern California, and we'll have less of a Mediterranean climate. However, it's coming. Whatever he wants to say, it's coming. I've seen a lot of it. I studied it as part of my PhD up in Berkeley, how we got to where we were at. But now we need to study where we're going. And where we're going is your problem.
Actually, what I took out of that was vineyards are being ripped out, and we're all going to be drinking Australian wine.
South African too.
Yeah.
Come on.
I had the privilege of studying desal a few years ago, and I was shocked to learn the permits and government approval needed for a desal plant is more than a nuclear power plant. And there's federal, state, and local approvals for desal. U.S. EPA, and then at the state level, you've got the Coastal Commission and the State Water Board, and then you have local land use issues, local city council planning commissions. On top of that, desal itself is controversial. Ratepayers don't want to pay for the desal because it is expensive water. Environmentalists don't like it because it's intrusive on the coastal lines and coastal viewsheds. Huntington Beach right now is contemplating a new desal plant in Orange County to kind of, do they already have one, Dr. Jones? Does Huntington Beach already have? What's that?
Are you talking about Poseidon?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm from Huntington Beach, and that battle's been raging for as long as I can remember.
And so I think the regulatory and political reality of desal is it's well off in the distance.
Yeah, I guess I'd just add that I think desalinization is nice in the, technological abstract, but by the time that we overcome all of the obstacles to, the red tape and the spending and the issues, there's going to be a whole nother slew of political issues, and there won't be the political will at the legislative level to do that. I think that what's needed now is a concentrated push to focus on long-term water storage issues. We briefly mentioned the snowpack, which is sitting at about 24% of normal yearly levels at today's date. I mean, that'll obviously change after the rainstorm. They think it'll go up to maybe 30 or 40. But finding a way to better store all of that runoff that comes from the Sierra Nevadas, I think is a better solution given what's feasible politically at the state legislative level. I think that desalinization is a nice exploration in the long term, but in terms of the politics of the drought now, it's something that's just not feasible.
Okay, so did you want to ask a question? Yeah.
First, in regards to the corporate water, that's new to me. I'm not familiar with any new legislative action at the state or federal level that addresses that issue. It does bring up an interesting point that the doctor's been talking about this water. You all know this is just tap water, right? This is just tap water that's marketed brilliantly to make it look like we're all drinking pure water. In regards to other technologies, and it's very interesting you bring that up. I know the supervisor for LA, my boss, County Supervisor Antonovich for LA County, he just instructed our Public Works Department to relook at cloud seeding. Cloud seeding is a fairly old technology from what I understand. I'm not very familiar with it. He's kind of directed, Public Works has investigated it in the past to determine if it's a worthwhile venture. They're re-looking to see if there's new technologies that make it, if we think it's an appropriate way to go forward. I have seen charts in which cloud seeding is a part of our water supply, and it's very minimal. I'm not even sure what local jurisdictions do it in California anymore, but we've started looking into it, and we've asked our public works staff to re-look into it.
Cloud seeding, once it hits the ground, that's the question, because virtually every major waterway in the state of California is what is called adjudicated. Anything that rains on it. So I might say, if you're going to do cloud seeding, and it has been done primarily in the southern Sierra, if you're going to do it, you first have to make a claim as to how much water you're going to generate, and thereby get the water master for that basin to adjudicate your production of it. It's something like, if I make usable water from sewage and put it in the ground, does other people have water rights over it? Or can I put it into the ground? And one of the problems with DWP is that right now we're going to recycle treated wastewater in San Fernando Valley because they might say own the water rights there. But the big elephant, or whale I call it, is Hyperion. And you can generate a lot of highly treated wastewater, and the West Basin Water District is doing that because the West Basin has water rights for the groundwater. For some reason, LA doesn't have much in the way of adjudicated water rights for groundwater south of the 10. So eventually, depending upon the price of the product, remember, it's one water, but it's also one product, and people make a lot of money on it. So, is it tap water? Most of the time. And you can do it yourself if you want to buy your own RO unit, basically.
I'd like to add to what the doctor is saying, and that is the county, Los Angeles County as a whole, just like multiple jurisdictions across Southern California, we're playing catch up. The whole objective of counties in the past regarding their flood control is, how do we preserve, as to the best of our ability, life and property? That was their main mission and objective. And now we are starting to realize that what you see now across Southern California are these channelized rivers, the concrete rivers. And that doesn't allow the water to replenish back into the groundwater. So now flood control districts and flood control managers are starting to realize, okay, how do we preserve life and property, but at the same time adjust our infrastructure to allow for groundwater to be recharged using our flood control system? And it's unfortunately an expensive process because it was expensive to concrete it all, and it's more expensive to take the concrete out. And that's definitely a long-term issue.
I guess I just add, I mean, would any of you like to give the speech to the public and try and convince them to vote for a water bond that allocates money to things like cloud seeding and desalinization? I mean, to me, it's already difficult enough to pass something that just invests in basic issues like storage and piping, because you get a wealth of opposition about, you know, the fish that they won't even be able to like serve us at lunch at the next students talk back. How could we ever convince the public to support a project of that scale, even in the midst of a massive drought? I think that it's also a good point to say that if we figure out how to make it rain more, where does the water go? You know, it only is effective if we have storage and piping capacities. And as far as I'm concerned, we have to focus on those before we focus on these technologies.
Well, thank you all for an excellent discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists. Just one more time, we have Dr. Tom Williams, Charles Epting, Jared Degonia, Nathaniel Haas. Please join me in thanking them for participating today. Once again, thanks to Sarah and everyone else from the Daily Trojan for being our co-sponsors of this series. Thank you, Sarah. And just a few final announcements on behalf of the Unruh Institute. This lunchtime series will continue. Once again, this semester we're holding this every other Wednesday. So the next one will take place on Wednesday, March 12th here in the Forum from 12 to 1 o'clock. Again, food will be served at 11:30. Our next roundtable discussion with our two legislators and residents, Anthony Portantino and Tony Strickland, will take place next Wednesday, March 5th at 7:30, and that's in Mudd Hall of Philosophy, room 102. Again, free food is served at 7:15. And finally, our scholarships and awards program for the summer. The application will be available within the next week for that. The scholarships are for students interested in obtaining political internships over the summer. Please stop by our office in VKC 263 for more information about that. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.